Somewhere in the world, there is a city with no roads, no cars, no buses, no bicycles, no pavements to walk along between the houses. Just water. Quiet, gray-green water, lapping softly between the buildings, carrying little boats from one place to another, all day and all night, gently, gently, gently. That city is called Venice. And the story of how Venice came to be there. Sitting right in the middle of the sea. As if someone simply forgot that cities are supposed to be built on land, is one of the most extraordinary, most peaceful, most quietly astonishing stories there is. So let's begin at the very beginning, a very long time ago, and take our time getting there. There is no hurry at all. A very long time ago, more than 1,500 years ago, which is almost impossible to imagine. It is so very long ago. There was a stretch of coastline in the northeast of Italy where the land met the sea in an unusual and rather interesting way. It didn't meet the sea cleanly the way a cliff does, all sharp and certain. And it didn't slope gradually into the water the way a sandy beach does either. No. Instead, the land sort of trickled out. It became marshy and tangled and full of reeds. It melted into the sea slowly, half land and half water, neither one thing nor the other. And out in the water, not far from that marshy edge, there were small islands, dozens and dozens of them. Low, flat little islands, barely rising above the surface of the sea, covered in grass and birds and nothing much else. The water all around these islands was shallow, not the deep, dark, rolling open sea, but a quiet, sheltered, silvery expanse called a lagoon. A lagoon is really a kind of enormous puddle in a way, though it would be unkind to say so to Venice. It sits behind a thin strip of land called a barrier, and the barrier keeps the storms and the big waves of the Adriatic Sea from pushing in too hard. The lagoon sits behind its barrier like a lake that knows it is also part of the sea, and it just rests there, calm and enclosed and protected. And for thousands of years, those little islands sat in that lagoon and nobody thought much about them. The people who lived on the mainland nearby, in towns with houses and walls and gardens and all the things you might expect. They knew the islands were there. Fishermen went out to them. People gathered birds and reeds and salt. But living out there on those small, flat, muddy islands, in the middle of all that open water? No, that was not where you would choose to build your home if you had a choice. But then something happened. And what happened was this. people stopped having a choice. Sometimes in history. And this is one of those times. Something frightening sweeps across the land, and everything changes very suddenly. In the 5th and 6th centuries, great armies came pushing into Italy from the north and east. One was led by a man called Attila the Hun, which is a very dramatic name, and the army swept through towns and villages, and the people who lived there had to run. And when you are running and you need somewhere to hide, somewhere safe, somewhere that horses and soldiers cannot easily follow, well, a shallow lagoon full of little muddy islands starts to look quite attractive, actually. So people ran to the water. They waded out to the islands. They built simple shelters there. They found that, yes, the mud was awkward and the islands were small, but the armies did not follow them out across the water. The water was their protection. And then, once the danger had passed, some of them stayed. Isn't that interesting? They came because they were frightened. They came in a hurry. They came with nothing. And they found something they hadn't expected. They found that living on islands in a lagoon, while unusual, was actually rather wonderful. There were fish in the water all around them. There was salt, which in those days was extraordinarily valuable. Salt was used to preserve food, and it was traded for great sums. And having a lagoon full of salt water meant you could make salt and sell it and become quite comfortable. The water itself kept them safe from armies on land. And the islands, small and flat as they were, could be made into something more permanent. So they began to build. Now. Here is the part of the story where something very surprising happens. Something that, when you think about it quietly, seems almost like magic, even though it is entirely real and entirely practical. The question that needed answering was this: how do you build a proper house? A heavy, solid, stone house. On an island made of mud. Mud is soft. Mud squishes. Mud is not the right thing to put a building on. A heavy stone building on soft mud would simply sink, slowly and sadly, down into the ground. And that would be no good at all. The people who came to the lagoon thought about this problem for a long time, and what they eventually worked out, what became the great secret of Venice, was this: trees. You build on trees, not on top of trees, not in trees, but with trees. With the trunks of trees, cut down and sharpened to a point, driven down into the mud, one after another, until the ground beneath was no longer mud at all, but a forest. A hidden, silent, upside-down forest beneath the water, with all the tips of the trunks pointing downward into the earth. Can you imagine it? A whole city resting on top of a forest it can't even see. The builders would take a long trunk of wood. Alder was popular, and oak, and they brought wood from the forests of what is now Croatia and Slovenia, floating it across the sea. And they would drive it straight down into the lagoon bed, deep into the soft mud, until it hit the harder clay and sand and gravel below. One pile, they called it. One wooden pile. And then another one next to it. And another, packed closely together, hundreds and hundreds of them in one spot, until the mud between them was so full of wood that it became compressed and firm. And then on top of all those tightly packed wooden piles, they would lay down a platform of heavy stone. And on top of that stone platform, which was now, surprisingly, very solid and very stable, they would build their houses. The piles disappeared under the water. The city rose up above it. And nobody walking through Venice hundreds and hundreds of years later would ever guess that underneath the palaces and churches and bridges, invisible beneath the surface of the canals, there is an entire forest, still standing, still holding everything up. Now, here is the thing about wood that you might think would be a problem. Wood sitting in water rots. Everybody knows that. You leave a fence post in the ground too long and it rots. You leave a piece of wood soaking in a puddle and it goes soft and falls apart. So how is it that these wooden piles, driven into the mud 1500 years ago, are still there? Still solid? Still holding up an entire city? The answer is one of those facts that, when you hear it for the first time, makes you stop and say, "Oh. Oh. Oh. That is extraordinary." Wood rots when there is oxygen. Oxygen feeds the tiny organisms that break wood down. That's why wood on land eventually crumbles and disappears. The air gets into it. But in the mud at the bottom of the lagoon, there is almost no oxygen at all. The mud is so thick and so tightly packed, especially with all those wooden piles pressed in together, that water and air can barely move through it. And without oxygen, the wood does not rot. Instead, over the centuries, something rather beautiful happens. The wood slowly, very slowly, turns to something almost like stone. The minerals in the water seep into the wood, replacing it, filling it, hardening it. The wood becomes petrified. It becomes dense and dark and as hard as iron. So, the old piles under Venice are not soft and crumbling. They are like iron rods. They are stronger now than they were when they were first cut from the forest. And they will probably last for thousands more years, just quietly sitting there in the dark under the canals, doing their patient, invisible, essential work. There is something very peaceful about that, isn't there? Those trees, which started life in a forest somewhere, growing slowly, stretching up toward the light, breathing in the air, are now resting at the bottom of a lagoon, holding up a city, and will continue doing so for longer than any of us can quite comprehend. So the city began to grow. Not quickly. Venice did not grow quickly. It grew the way things grow when they are going to last a very long time. Slowly. Carefully. Over many, many generations. First, small islands were built up with piles and platforms. Then the channels between the islands became the streets, in a way. People moved from island to island by boat, crossing the water on flat wooden craft, paddled along by someone standing at the back. And then, gradually, people began to build bridges. A bridge across a canal in Venice is a graceful thing. It arches over the water like a stone rainbow, and you walk up one side and down the other, and when you are at the top, you can look out along the canal and see the buildings reflected in the water below, all slightly wobbly in the reflections, and the light coming off the surface in moving patterns. And it is very beautiful. Venice today has over 400 bridges. Some are wide and grand, some are narrow and simple, just enough for two people to pass each other going opposite ways. And each one of those bridges connects one part of the city to another, stitching all the islands together until you would not know, walking through the streets, that you were on an island at all. The streets of Venice are narrow, very narrow. In some places, you can stretch out your arms and touch both walls at once. The buildings press close together overhead so that only a thin strip of sky is visible above you, and the light that comes down is golden and soft. Water splashes quietly somewhere nearby. Always, everywhere in Venice, there is the sound of water. And then, every so often, you step around a corner, and there is a canal right in front of you, and a gondola goes slowly past, and you remember, oh yes, I am in a city built on the sea. There is one canal in Venice that is bigger than all the others. It curves through the heart of the city in a great, lazy S shape, like a river that has been turned sideways and given better architecture. This is the Grand Canal. The Grand Canal is lined on both sides with the most extraordinary buildings. Palaces, mostly, built by wealthy merchants and families over hundreds of years, each one grander than the last, each one trying to be the most impressive thing on the water. They have elaborate facades, arched windows, columns, balconies, all reflected in the canal below. The water gives each building two versions of itself, the real one above and the shimmering one below. And they both exist at once, comfortably, side by side. The Grand Canal is about 2 miles long and about 50 meters wide in most places. It is deep enough for large boats. For most of Venice's history, this was the main thoroughfare, like the city's main road, but made of water. All the goods and people and trade that made Venice rich came through this canal. And Venice did become rich. Extraordinarily, spectacularly rich. Venice's position, sitting in its lagoon, at the edge of the sea, close to both the land routes of Europe and the sea routes to the east, meant that it became one of the great trading cities of the ancient world. Merchants from Venice sailed to Constantinople, to Alexandria, to the Silk Road cities, and they brought back spices and silk and glass and jewels and all manner of wonderful things and sold them in the markets of Europe. For hundreds of years, Venice was one of the most powerful places on earth. Ships came and went constantly. The lagoon was busy with sails. The warehouses along the canals were full of goods from a dozen countries, and the wealth that poured through Venice was poured back into the city, into the churches, the palaces, the bridges, the art, the glass, blowing workshops on the island of Murano, the libraries and the music and all the thousands of beautiful things that Venice still holds today. And through all of this, all the centuries of trade and ships and wealth and power, the wooden piles kept doing their quiet work below, holding everything up, patient and invisible and essential. It is one of those things about Venice that makes it feel, in a gentle way, like something from a dream. That underneath all the grandeur and the beauty and the noise of this famous city, there is just a forest. Just trees, standing in the dark, in the mud, doing what trees do, being strong, being steady, holding things up. Venice is made up of many, many islands, 118 of them altogether. Some are small, barely larger than a garden. Some are substantial, with their own neighborhoods and churches and markets. And they are all connected by those 400 and something bridges, so that you can walk from one end of the city to the other on foot, crossing from island to island without noticing, barely aware that you are crossing water at all unless you happen to look down over the railing. There are about 170 canals in Venice, all told. Most are narrow. Some are barely wider than the boats that use them. You can reach out from a gondola in some canals and almost touch the walls of the buildings on either side. The buildings come straight down to the water. No pavement, no step, just water right at the door. In fact, many buildings in Venice have a door that opens straight onto a canal. Not a door to a road, but a door to the water. And the way you arrive at someone's house, or a shop, or a church, might be by boat, tying up outside and stepping from the boat to the doorstep just as naturally as stepping off a bus. Can you imagine? stepping out of your front door and into a boat. The way other cities use taxis, Venice uses water taxis. The way other cities have buses, Venice has water buses, called vaporetti, which is a lovely Italian word that sounds like little vapor, little steam, which is what the first motorized water buses were powered by. And the gondola, of course. The gondola is the most famous boat in Venice, and it is one of the most beautiful small boats in the world. Long and narrow and slightly curved, painted entirely in black, propelled by a single person standing at the back and pushing through the water with a long oar in a gentle, rhythmic, almost hypnotic motion. Gondoliers, the people who steer the gondolas, train for years. They have to learn every canal in Venice, every turn, every bridge height, how to navigate the narrow passages and the larger waterways, how to steer precisely in the dark, how to read the currents that run through the canals with the tides. Because, yes, the water in Venice rises and falls with the tides. Twice a day, the sea breathes in and out, and Venice breathes with it. The tides are one of the things that makes Venice so interesting to think about. The city is connected to the sea in a way that is immediate and very real. When the tide comes in, the water rises. When it is a very high tide, which happens more often now than it used to, for reasons connected to the way the whole earth is slowly changing. The water comes up through the drains and the doorways and the low parts of the city, and the famous Piazza San Marco, which is the great open square in the heart of Venice, fills up with water, and people in wellies are photographed having coffee at outdoor tables with the sea washing gently past their chairs. This is called acqua alta, high water. It has always happened occasionally in Venice, but it is happening more and more. The sea is rising a little year by year, and Venice is also sinking a little year by year. Not dramatically, not fast enough to see, not fast enough to feel. Just very, very slowly, the city settles into its lagoon, a fraction of a centimeter each year. The people of Venice have thought about this for a long time, and they have been doing something rather remarkable about it. Under the sea, at the entrances to the lagoon, the places where the open Adriatic Sea connects to the protected water inside, they have built enormous floodgates. These are like great underwater doors, hinged at the bottom, lying flat on the seabed when the tide is normal. But when a very high tide is coming, the gates are filled with air, and they rise up from the seafloor and stand upright, blocking the entrance to the lagoon, keeping the high water out. The system is called mos, which is the Italian word for Moses, the same Moses from the old story who held his hand out and parted the sea. The name is very apt. Venice is holding back the sea, just as it has always done. just as it has done from the very beginning. When the first wooden pile was driven into the first muddy island, and someone said, "Here," we will build here, on the water. And if you walk through Venice today, and it is entirely possible, it is one of the great walking cities in the world, you can wander for hours and hours and never walk the same canal twice. You will find things that have been there for a very long time. The Basilica di San Marco, which is the great cathedral at the heart of the city, was begun in the year 828. Its floors are not flat. They ripple and tilt gently because the ground beneath has settled unevenly over the centuries. The mosaic floors have waves in them like frozen water, which is fitting in a way. Everything in Venice has something of water about it. There are churches on tiny islands you can only reach by boat. There are houses so old that the stones are worn smooth by 1,000 years of hands and feet. There are wells in courtyard squares. Because, of course, you cannot dig for fresh water when you are surrounded by seawater. So the people of Venice built clever systems to collect rainwater and filter it down through sand into underground cisterns. And those cisterns are what the old wellheads in the squares were connected to. Fresh water was one of the great challenges of Venice. You can imagine, surrounded by the sea, you cannot drink the water you live in. For much of its history, Venice depended on collecting rain and importing fresh water from the mainland. It is one of the things that makes the city remarkable. The people solved all these problems. The soft ground, the salty water, the tides, and made a thriving, beautiful, lasting city anyway. Now, at night, Venice is a different kind of place entirely. When the tourists have gone home and the water buses have mostly stopped running, and the only sounds are the lapping of water against stone and the distant clang of a bell from somewhere across the lagoon. Venice at night is one of the quietest places imaginable. The canals reflect the lamplight. Every yellow window has its twin in the water below, shivering slightly. The bridges are lit from underneath and glow like stone moons. The cats, and there are many cats in Venice, wandering along the canal edges, sitting on bridges, watching from doorways. The cats are quiet and still, watching the dark water move. And somewhere below all of it, in the mud and the dark and the stillness, the old piles are there. The old trees are there. Turn to something harder and stronger than wood, keeping very still, keeping very steady, holding the city that grew up above them in the sunlight. It is something to think about, that. All those trees. They were once in a forest. Real trees with leaves and birdsong and sunlight coming through the canopy. Someone cut them down and floated them to the islands in the lagoon. Someone drove them into the mud with tremendous effort, one by one, thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And those same trees are still there, and they will still be there long after everyone reading this story has gone to sleep and woken up and gone to sleep many, many times more. There is a particular quality to light in Venice that painters have been trying to capture for centuries, and many of them have done it beautifully. But none of them has completely caught it, because it moves. The light in Venice is reflected from the water. It comes from two directions at once, from the sky above and from the water below. And the water is always moving, just a little, so the light is always shifting. It comes through windows and plays on ceilings. It moves across the faces of buildings in rippling patterns. Early in the morning, when the city is quiet and the mist sits on the lagoon, the light is soft and silver. In the afternoon, when the sun is bright, it bounces off the canals and makes everything shimmer. At dusk, it turns the water pink and gold and deep orange, and the buildings seem to glow from within. This is why so many artists came to Venice, and so many writers, and so many people who simply wanted to look at something beautiful for a while. There has probably been more wandering and looking and sitting quietly with a cup of coffee in Venice than in almost any other place in the world. Because Venice invites that. It invites slowness. It has no cars to hurry you along. The streets are narrow and meandering. You can get lost very easily in Venice, and getting lost there is genuinely pleasant, because you are always finding something unexpected. A tiny square with a tree in it. A canal too narrow to name. A cat asleep on a warm stone step. A view between two buildings out across the lagoon to where the sky meets the water in a long, flat, peaceful line. The Rialto Bridge is one of the most famous bridges in Venice. It crosses the Grand Canal at its narrowest point, and it is both a bridge and a marketplace. There are shops along both sides of it, little stalls and stone archways where things have been bought and sold for hundreds of years. It was finished in 1591, which means it has been standing for over 400 years, and it is still perfectly solid, and still full of people crossing it and looking down at the Grand Canal below, and still lit up beautifully at night when the city is quiet. 400 years. It is worth sitting with that number for a moment. 400 years of people crossing the same bridge, looking at the same canal, watching the same kind of light moving on the same water. History in Venice doesn't feel very far away. When you stand on the Rialto and look at the Grand Canal, You are standing roughly where merchants stood in the Middle Ages and watched the same boats, different boats, but same water, and felt the same breeze off the lagoon. There is one more thing to know about Venice, and it is perhaps the most beautiful and the most bittersweet. Venice is unique. Truly, genuinely unique. There is nowhere else like it on earth. And because of the rising water and the sinking ground and the way the world is changing, it will probably not always be exactly as it is now. It is changing, slowly. A little lower than it was, more flooded than before. And so the people who love Venice, and there are millions of them, are working very hard to keep it. The MOSE floodgates, the repairs to buildings and bridges and canal walls, the careful management of the lagoon's water. All of it is a kind of long, patient, loving act of preservation, keeping this extraordinary place safe, the way you might keep something irreplaceable and wonderful. And the city keeps being lived in. People still live in Venice. Real people, not just tourists, though the tourists have made it complicated. Families who have been there for generations. Shopkeepers and fishermen and boat repairers and glassblowers on Murano. Children who go to school by boat. The city is alive, and it intends to stay that way. So that is Venice. A city built on water, built on mud and wood and stone and ingenuity and necessity and, eventually, beauty. Built by people who came running from a frightening world and found that the water, which seemed like a problem, was actually a solution. That the soft mud, which seemed like an obstacle, could become a foundation if you knew what to do with it. That the sea, which surrounded them on all sides, was also their protection, their food, their highway, their neighbor. And underneath it all, the old trees. Still there. Still standing in the dark under the canals. Dense and hard and patient. Holding up a city that grew and shone and traded and painted and built and sang for 1,500 years above them. Holding up all that history, all that beauty, all that waterlight. It is a very long way to go to sleep when you think about it. From a forest somewhere in the mountains, to the bottom of a lagoon, to the foundation of one of the most beautiful cities the world has ever made. But there they are, resting quietly in the dark, holding everything up. Quite content, one imagines, in the deep, still, oxygenless mud, doing their patient, invisible, irreplaceable work. While above them, the water moves, and the light shifts, And somewhere on the Grand Canal, a gondola moves slowly past in the evening, and the gondolier's oar dips in and lifts out, in and out, and the water barely makes a sound, just the softest, quietest slip. And then silence. And then